Aldous Huxley was an English writer and philosopher. He wrote nearly 50 books. And here's his quote about history. That men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons of history. Welcome to the History Slices podcast, a mother-son duo discussing awesome bits of history. We prove on every show that history is not boring, entertaining, yet stimulating. This is History Slices. And now, here's your hosts, Jacob and Rachel.
All right, Jacob, you ready to get started?
Hey, yeah, I'm ready. How you doing? You doing good?
Yeah, I'm doing well today. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's been pretty busy, pretty hectic around here, but that's life, I suppose.
That is life. Hard to escape hectic.
Yeah. So today, I don't know if you remember what we're talking about, because I mentioned it last time.
Yeah, I do. We're talking about military heroes, and not just American military heroes, but people who stand out in the military for, I guess, wherever, whenever.
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing, right? Because when I was working on this over the last week or so, it's been a little, not quite a week because the schedule's been weird, but from our audience's perspective, it's been a week. I ended up talking about Audie Murphy, and I decided to cut that because I thought that'd be good for its own episode.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
That's a name
so
I recognize, but I have no idea why.
yeah, well, he is an American World War II hero, but don't worry about it. We'll talk about him at a later date.
Okay.
I'm bringing it up because none of the people we're talking about today are American.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right, so I want to talk about them. I thought it'd be a fun little change of pace. Most of these are from World War II, which, isn't too surprising. I think one of them is a bit older, just because I thought, as I was compiling this list, I'm like, a lot of these are from the same conflict. Let's pick someone else, just, to change it up a little bit. So the first person I'm going to talk about, he's Finnish. His name's Simo Haya. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Have you heard of him? Do you know anything about him?
That sounds completely unfamiliar to me.
All right, awesome. So this was in the Winter War, which, if you don't know what it is, basically the Soviet Union was invading Finland for reasons that are very complicated and involved in like the geopolitics of that region. Like since the 1800s, it's like a whole thing, right?
Yeah,
But
I know completely nothing about Finland.
That's totally fine. That's why I'm summarizing it. The war itself only lasted about 3 months, like from November 30th, 1939 to March 13th, 1940 or so, around that time. So something in a nutshell, because obviously I don't want to get too much into like all the nitty gritty of it. Finland is to the USSR what Vietnam was to the US.
Okay.
Right, in that it was a smaller nation with not as big of a military that managed to hold off a more like a superpower, basically, and cause a lot of headaches for said superpower.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm sure people will disagree with that kind of statement, but it's like a good comparison that I thought of.
Okay.
Anyway, so
I'm just gonna let you roll with it because I'm don't really know the ins and outs of the Vietnam War either.
That's totally fine. Oh, we should do like a whole episode on that then. Anyways, this is Simo Haya. He is called the White Death by Soviet forces, and Finnish propaganda as well kind of picked it up. He has the highest number of sniper kills in any major war.
Wow.
Like over 500, like confirmed.
Wow.
I believe. Right? Like he was crazy good at like what he did.
Gosh.
He was, just some background information. He was the seventh of 8 children. And at age 17, he joined the White Guard, which is a Finnish like voluntary militia thing. And at the age of 19, he had begun his compulsory military service, which is a thing in Finland. It's actually a thing in like
at least several countries that I'm aware of.
Yeah, but like in that area, like I know Estonia has like a similar thing. Well, early on, he was known to be a great shot, but because he was humble, or at the very least camera shy, he didn't draw too much attention to himself. Like in group photos, he'd always be at the back of the group and stuff like that. But when when the war started and he kind of became a national hero, and there's no kind about him, he did become a national hero. The spotlight was more on him. In 1940, he was shot in the face, but he lived. He survived.
Wow.
But half his face was missing. It was like a whole horrible scarring thing, and it more or less ended his career. He was awarded a bunch of honors, including like the first and second class Medals of Liberty and the third and fourth class Crosses of Liberty. It's all like Finnish military stuff. But once he retired, he never had any kids or married or anything like that. I guess it just wasn't he wasn't interested in that. But he passed away in 2002 at the age of 96.
Wow, he lived to be quite old and into the
Right?
2000s. Imagine what he witnessed in his life. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, I just
500 kills to his name.
yeah, over 500.
Gosh.
I couldn't find like an exact like number, but
Sure.
the
And was that supposedly during the same period of time in that 3 year, what did you call that war?
the Winter War.
The Winter War? Did those
I
statistics come from
I
there?
believe so. There might have been some like outside of it, for all I know. But given that in 1940, which was around the time that war ended, his career kind of ended because of the injury he had. I wouldn't like put it too much after that, at least.
Yeah, it kind of stands to reason it would have happened before that.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I want to talk about. I've known about this guy for some years now, just because I'm interested in history and all that. But I thought it was interesting to talk about and be like, hey, this guy's pretty cool.
So how did he cross your rate? Do you have more to say about him?
Well, I have like one other thing I can say is
Okay.
that I'm not sure how I first found out about him. I think it might have just been something I stumbled upon, but I do know that in his journal, like his privately kept memoirs or whatever, he was kind of very regretful of the lives he took and all that. He was very like, that's messed up, but he was good at it and he wanted to help protect his country. So
Yeah,
it's
boy,
kind
I
of one of
imagine
those
that
things.
would come at quite a personal cost, and it'd be easy to feel regretful about that. But yeah, gosh, some people have harder burdens to carry than others.
It's like the guy who I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but the guy who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima,
Mm-hmm.
like that guy, like I can't even imagine that not mindset, I guess, but
Yeah, it's hard though.
what
We
that
can't
does
really
to
put
someone.
ourselves in their position at all because
No,
we don't want to assume how they feel about it.
yeah,
So it's not really for us to put that on them, I guess.
no, of course not. It reminded me of that, even though
Yeah.
obviously the scale's a bit different.
Just
Anyways, moving
being
on.
required to take any life is got to be difficult.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Moving on to like the next person I want to talk about is actually a group of people, and it's actually from the Soviet side of things, which is kind of funny.
During the same
Uh,
conflict, you say, like during the Winter War?
well, this was during World War II, but
Okay.
the Winter War was like a sub conflict of World War II.
Okay.
I know it's confusing, complicated. Don't worry about it. Well, the Night Witches, that was like their nickname. Their official name was the 588th Night Bomber Regiment.
Hmm.
It was an all-female group of Soviet fighter pilots.
Wow.
They were formed in 1942, and they wreaked havoc on the German forces. And their planes weren't like top of the line either. Like I think the German planes were more superior at the time, but they were just like that skilled that they managed to during night. This is all during night, of course. Like bomb like, key positions and stuff like that, and really kind of mess them up as
That's
like the Germans
incredible.
were
That'll
invading.
wow.
Hmm.
What did you call them? A regiment?
Yeah,
Do you
the
know like how many planes are we talking about?
there was three, I believe,
Wow.
or at least I found three in my research.
Yeah, that any women would have been trained at that point to be a
Mhm.
fighter pilot. It's pretty amazing, fantastic.
Yeah. So basically, what happened was Stalin had this idea to set a record for the longest flight of an all-female like pilot crew plane thing, which is a bit specific. But what was going on was that America, with Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart and all these pilots, were like setting a bunch of records.
Right.
And Stalin was like, "Oh, hey, we can set some records ourselves." So
Okay.
he got these women pilots named Marina Raskova, Serafima Amosova, and a third one who has a really long name, Yevdorika Ratskivik. I'm not sure. I
Okay.
probably butchered that, but you get the idea. That's them. And there was some pretty severe weather conditions because they're like flying around northern Russia, which is like basically Arctic
Yeah.
areas through Siberia and all that. they had to crash land, like have a controlled crash, and basically hike their way through Siberia, which, if you don't know, is not a nice place. It's not very
Wow.
habitable. And they were rescued, like I think a couple days later. So not only did they break the record they were trying to break, but them being able to survive that harsh wilderness, at least for a while, it really impressed Stalin, right? He was like, "Oh, you guys or
Wow.
you girls are pretty badass." So 3 years later, Germany invades, as they do, and Stalin. That's a little unfair, During the world wars, they kept invading places.
Yeah.
Anyways, Stalin, he got a somewhat clever idea, like, "Oh, hey, why don't I put these two very skilled pilots, to work, just kind of protecting the motherland." And I should say that Marina Raskova, who I think was like kind of the main one, like kind of the leader of the group, she was really pushing for it. She was like, it makes no sense to have a significant portion of your population not involved in trying to like protect the country and all that.
Huh.
And she was hero of the Soviet Union, which was like an award there in that time, and it was also on Stalin's "You're okay by my book" list. So you couldn't just like disappear her or shut her up or anything,
Did he actually have
Uh,
a list like that?
well, not a official list, but like he would often like
She was kind of protected.
in that sense, yeah, it
Yeah.
was like the if you displeased Stalin, not only would you disappear in the night, but he would have photographs of you edited so that you wouldn't appear in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty crazy, but that was just one of the terrible things he did. He's not a nice person. Anyways, yeah, I just thought that was like a not a I don't know if rarity is the right word for it, but I thought it was kind of a unique situation. All female Soviet fighter group of pilots just going around bombing Germans and stuff. I thought that was
Kicking butt.
interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Really surprising to me for the time period that it was. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
No.
okay, it's hard to love something about war, but it's
Sure, sure.
fascinating.
It is, yeah. I actually found out about them from a Sabaton song, which is pretty fun.
I don't Sabaton, is that a group name?
It's a band, yeah. They're a metal band that's seen about like or have songs about like various epic war stories and stuff like that.
Really? Is that an American band or
And they're Scandinavian. I don't
uh-huh.
remember their exact nationality, but
Huh. Cool.
yeah, I don't want to get too
No,
sidetracked.
that's
A
okay. I just
lot
think
of
that's interesting where you found that out.
Yeah, a lot of metal bands tend to be Scandinavian or German, as opposed to like there isn't as many in America. But
Hmm.
yeah, anyways, so the third person I want to talk about, and this is a person, Mad Jack Churchill. I don't know if you
Mad
know who
Jack
this guy
Churchill,
is.
no.
All right, well, this guy, he was born John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill. Yes, really, that was his
Wow.
name.
Wow.
He was a British Army officer in the Second World War, and he became known for being kind of out there, I guess, hence the nickname Mad Jack.
Yeah.
While he would go into battle, he would carry a long sword, a long bow and a broadsword, as well as playing on his bagpipe.
Wow.
Now, miraculously, he didn't
He
die in
was
battle.
English?
He was English.
Huh.
I mean, yeah, I believe so. Miraculously, he didn't die in battle, despite using weapons that had been obsolete for centuries. At one point, he was captured, and there was kind of a funny bit of confusion for a while because the Germans thought that he was related to Winston Churchill because of his last name. He wasn't, of course. That's just like a coincidence.
Huh.
But when they found out that he was sent to a concentration camp, he managed to survive that as well, and eventually was released and managed to outlive the war. Basically, after
Wow.
the war, of all things, he became a surfer. And he
Totally
lived to be
unexpected.
Yeah, I know, and he lived to be 89 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, I want to talk about him because he seemed ridiculous in all the best ways.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that.
Now, I want to say, all that being said, most of his notable stuff comes from other people's account of him.
Hmm.
He was apparently not that big into bragging, so some of it might be exaggerated. For example, it is said that he carried a Scottish claymore, right, which is a very large sword, is very sexy. It actually was a lot smaller, more practical. It was like the type of sword that military officers in the past would use, right?
Hmm.
Like kind of that type of sword. But he still carried a sword into like a
Yeah,
battle with guns and
that's
stuff. So
pretty
it's still,
crazy.
out there is just something's get exaggerated like that.
Yeah.
Details are important and all, but sometimes being awesome is just awesome. So
Yeah. So the details don't really matter that much. So he died at 89, I think you said, but what year was
yeah,
that about? Was that the 90s or something?
he died in 1996.
1996. Okay, interesting. And the surfing part has me interested because when I think surfing, I'm always thinking of the United States.
Yeah.
Because of course that's what I'm familiar with. I know there's surfing in other parts of the world, but I don't usually think of English shores as being surf worthy. I don't know. I don't know anything about them, but do you know where he surfed? I'm probably making a huge fool of myself because there probably is fantastic surfing over there. I have just no
Yeah, I
idea.
mean, well, I can talk about that for a little bit. I'm not quite sure where he served. I assumed it was in England. I just kind of like, all right, moving on, like
Yeah,
when researching
yeah,
this.
yeah.
But I do know that England is pretty north. Like we in America, we don't often think of it as being as north as it is, but it's pretty north, and the weather tends to be pretty choppy. So I guess it depends, like what kind of conditions you'd like to surf in, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. So the last person I want to talk about, he's actually not from World War II, I mentioned. Most of the people we talked about are from kind of the same point in time. This guy, Yi Sun Sin, is from the 1500s.
Quite a difference.
Yeah, he was a Korean admiral and he is a national hero. Like they have statues of him and stuff over
Huh.
there. And he came from a high class background, which of course means that the military is not the popular choice, at least at the time. And when he was out starting his military career, because he'd always wanted to be like in the military, it was like his ambition. Korea hadn't been in a war for like 200 years or so, right? So it was kind of an interesting time for him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually pretty competent. He took his job seriously, but a lot of the officials, both like in the military and the government at the time, were corrupt because I guess too much peacetime does this to people, I suppose. So there's a lot of setbacks for him because some people in power didn't like how uncorruptible he was,
Hmm.
and sometimes they needed to sift blame from their failures to like others,
Yeah.
So a few times he got screwed over and basically had to restart his career. Like they would just demote him on fraudulent charges, but he kept at it, right? He kept coming back, which I think is admirable. It happened like 3 or 4 times is ridiculous. Um, like there's
Wow.
one where he was in charge of a island base or so, and I said Korea wasn't at war for like a couple centuries, and that's true, but they still had pirates and like raiders and people causing trouble.
Uh-huh.
And so the base he was at was very understaffed and very undermanned and kind of falling down. And he kept sending requests after requests to, hey, we need more men here. Hey, we need some more, help, basically. And that request kept getting ignored until pirates did attack. He managed to save some people. He was very kind of on top of things, but they still kind of managed to wreck Saw. And he got blamed for it despite
All his requests
um,
for assistance.
yeah, being ignored. So it was really like whoever was in charge of that was fault, not so much his fault. But stuff like that kept happening. He was also like someone connected though, which helped him like return. His childhood friend ended up becoming the prime minister and kind of helped keep him in the ring, like kind of subtly, because
Wow.
of course he can't be like, I totally like this guy and
Mm-hmm.
I'm showing him favoritism. So his hands are kind of tied sometimes too, but it managed to help him in the long run. Then, when the story really picks up, Japan did something that they would do multiple times throughout history, which is why they're so disliked in that region of the world. They invaded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, they're trying to get into China through Korea, right? But the Koreans, they were like, no, we're not doing that because Korea and China were more friendly at the time, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, Japan, this is getting a little in the weeds. Don't worry, I won't get too much into detail there. But Japan, they had just finished up their Sengoku Jidai period, which basically is like Japanese Game of Thrones. If Game of Thrones was Where's Waldo in terms of complexity,
Mm.
it kind of deserves its own episode, really. Long story short, Japan was divided amongst a bunch of clans. Eventually, they got united under the Oda clan, and they kind of became like one big nation again, as opposed to a bunch of like little feudal groups.
Mm.
Japan's very militaristic. For like a long portion of their history, they've been like this, and had just finished 100 years of internal warfare.
Wow, that's a
So
long time.
yeah, no, it lasted forever. Korea, in contrast, remember, they had 200 years of peace. And the military was filled with nepotism, and Germans just not ready for warfare, right?
Right.
So they were utterly unprepared, and they probably would have lost if it wasn't for Yi, right? Our boy Yi. The war, by the way, this war lasted around 7 years, so it was a kind of a hefty conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So Yi was a naval commander at the time that Japan invaded, though his actions led to some serious promotions throughout this conflict. When war broke out, apparently he had like a flask of Mad Genius or something, but he designed a sip, and then he made like a bunch of them, or not a bunch, but like a handful. And this was the turtle sip, right? And this thing was crazy. It had a metal roof with spikes on it, and the prow was made up to resemble a dragon head, and it
Wow.
would blow out like noxious smoke and stuff like that. So basically, this guy made an ironclad, like centuries ahead of schedule. That's some like Leonardo da Vinci stuff right there.
Hmm.
It's crazy. There's only like a couple made, but they were pretty OP, so they helped.
They were
And
pretty OP,
he
Jacob.
overpowered.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. And multiple times through. Sorry, I got a little excited there. Um, Multiple times throughout this conflict, it wasn't just that he had these cool sips. He also was like a really brilliant tactician. He was
Mm.
like one of the best like naval commanders in history, I'm pretty sure, because
Mm.
he managed to completely dominate with a much smaller force. He would lure the Japanese ships in and then like ambush them, so that despite them having like a massive invasion armada, but whatever, he managed to with his much smaller force, pick off groups one at one, just boom, boom,
Mm-hmm.
boom.
Sounds like a smart guy.
He was very smart. And Korea he's like the, I don't mean to group a whole nation together or anything like that, but seems like he was like the only competent one in that
Oh.
conflict in terms of Koreans, because it's like a lot of like the government officials like, well, we don't want war, so we're going to pretend that it isn't happening. Like
Wow.
when Japan first showed up and they started making their demands about, hey, let's march through so we can get to China. They're like, what? No, that doesn't make sense. They wouldn't. That's way over the top. This is clearly they're trying to barter with us, right? They're trying to freak us out so that they can like then ask for trade or whatever they actually want. This is just like a bluff.
But you took
And
it
then
seriously.
but they yeah, and then they showed up, they started landing troops on the Korean shoreline, and they're like, okay, well, that's obviously they're come to apologize for their previous rude behavior. It was just like the stupidest thing. And like the one guy who I can't remember his name because it's Korean, but the one guy who denied him reinforcements in that base thing,
Uh-huh.
he was like the supreme naval guy at the time, and so he totally did no favors to Yi Sun Sin, because he believed that Yi had kind of humiliated him
Right.
earlier by calling him out on the lack of. It was like a whole bunch of baloney, basically. But Yi managed to save the day, managed to stall them long enough for China to get its troops mobilized and march to and clear out the Japanese. Yi, unlike like everyone else we talked about, he actually did die in battle, but it was a super heroic fashion. Basically, what happened was, and this was like a pivotal engagement in the war. Basically, he had his ships along a river, because this was in the 1500s and they didn't have radio or anything like that. He was like banging on his drum. He was keeping the troops' morale up, basically,
Uh-huh.
and keeping them all like, heck yeah, we could do this, we got this, you know. And that went on throughout the whole battle, and it
Wait, he
managed
was
to.
he was banging on a drum throughout the whole battle?
Well, yeah, well, he was issuing orders and stuff and banging on a drum and all
Okay.
that. Like
Okay.
it wasn't all he was doing. But when the conflict ended, right, and like the Chinese command, I believe it was a Chinese commander in that fight, came up to Yi. He was like, "Hey, you guys came in nick of time. You totally saved our butts. You're a badass. I've heard a lot of great things about you. That's awesome." He found out that Yi had actually, during the battle, he had been shot,
Hmm.
and he had told his lieutenant or whoever, like the guy next to him, like, hey, keep banging on this drum, keep issuing orders, we can't lose this fight.
Hmm.
So he actually like kind of not sacrificed himself, but he
But knowing that
kept it.
he was on his way out, he wanted to keep he wanted to keep the energy going, so he passed it on.
Yeah, yeah. And when the Chinese commander found out about this, he like openly wept, because he's like, "Oh, that's amazing. Like I
Yeah.
can't. I wish I'd known this guy,
Wow,
actually,
loss of a really great person.
yeah.
Wow. Well, it's a
But
story of perseverance
and I think it's just interesting from like a historical perspective. If this guy wasn't around or had died early on in life, which he could have, there was like a close call with like a horse incident when he was younger. It's a whole it's a whole thing. But like it's very probable in my mind that Japan would have totally conquered Korea and went to war, like proper war with China. It's just interesting, like the butterfly effect there.
yeah, what could have happened in the last 500 years?
Yeah, no, totally. So yeah, I thought, hey, we often talk about certain events, like specific events in history
Mm-hmm.
or specific individuals, which is who we're going to talk about next time, but we'll get to that in a moment. And I thought it would be interesting to try to mix things up and talk about a group of
Yeah,
people, just
category.
with an overarching theme.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I probably could have maybe had a more diverse selection. It occurred to me as I was like wrapping my notes, and one of the reasons why I included there was these are all like Second World War
Well, if you
people.
imagine, if you just go back 500 years, all the heroes that must have existed in all of if you're including the entire world,
Hmm.
that's probably a pretty big pool to choose from. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I could see
I just
why.
went with sorry, I just went with some names that I was familiar with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I thought perhaps our audience might not be as familiar
And I
with all
sure
of them.
wasn't. I don't think I was familiar with any of them except for maybe, what was his name? Crazy Jack?
Oh,
Mad
Crazy
Jack?
Jack,
Mad
Mad
Jack?
Jack,
Yeah. Except for
yeah.
maybe him, I might have heard a hint about him and being a piper in, in a battle. But even that I'm not sure of. So, yeah. Well, that was a really interesting episode, Jacob. Nice job.
That's good. I'm glad you liked it. I hope our audience liked it too. I know
Yeah.
it's a little on the shorter side, but it's hard to figure out how long they're going to be when you
Yeah.
have like the notes all written out and
Yeah.
stuff. So next week, we're going to be talking about Catherine the Great. Do you know about her? Or
I really don't know anything about Catherine the Great.
oh,
I
awesome.
really don't.
Okay.
Not
Well,
one
we're going
thing.
back. That's totally fine. That's great because then it'll be super. I guess educational then, or
Yeah.
informal, informational, whatever.
Informational.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Needless to say, we're going back to Russia. That's all. That's a little teaser I'll leave you with there.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to that episode, Jacob. And listeners, thanks so much for being a part of our journey. And until next time.
Bye.
Confucius once said, "Study the past if you would define the future." You've been listening to the History Slices podcast with Jacob and Rachel. We hope you've gotten some useful information from the show. We hope we made you think, and we hope you were entertained. We know we had fun, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook at History Slices and on Instagram at History Slices Podcast. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show, and tell a friend about the show. That'll help us out too. One more quote before we go from Michael Crichton. If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. Till next time, this is History Slices, signing off.